Welcome to La Verdad Duele. What is that? The truth. The truth that hurts. Even though we're not intending to hurt anybody's feelings, we know that we may share information that many people have strong opinions on. This is solely based on the fact that we love sharing information and we love passing that knowledge. And this podcast is all about that. And we hope you can enjoy that. Let's get to it. Welcome, Puyaka. I'm your host, Tijani Musa. The special guest in the studio today is a friend that I met while we were studying at George Mason University, who's going to talk to us about his work in the West Coast and as well as his the time that he spends helping people that are in need and helping people that have given up on themselves and trying to provide some type of hope for individuals in the West Coast and nationally as well. And then also he's going to talk to us about some of his publications, things that he has written and his experience at the university in the West Coast. So without delay, I'm going to introduce the guest. His name is Francis Aguisanda. Francis graduated from George Mason University in 2014 with a bachelor's degree in biology and from Stanford University in 2019 with a master's degree in stem cell biology. While his day job is spent at a Bay Area Biotech Company, he spends his free time as a crisis counselor with the National Suicide Prevention Hotline and Santa Clara County, California Behavioral Health Services. He's passionate about mental health and talking about ways that we can end mental health stigma. Welcome to the studio, Francis Aguisanda.
What's going on, Puyaka Tijani? It's good to see you, and thanks for inviting me on the podcast. Appreciate it.
Awesome. Before we get into the conversation, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share the National Suicide Hotline. So in case anybody that's listening to this podcast needs any help, needs anybody to talk to, or just want to call to hear positivity, to hear hope from anybody, they can always call this phone number. The phone number is 1-800-273-8255. Again, the phone number is 1-800-273-8255. So, Francis, now that we have provided our phone number, let's go ahead. Let's tell the listeners your journey from George Mason to the West Coast at Stanford. Can you go briefly into that and tell us how you made that journey and why Stanford?
For sure, man. It's been a long journey. So, as you said, I graduated in 2014 from George Mason University. And while I was studying at George Mason, I was studying biology and felt like I was pretty good at the subject. So, and I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life. So it kind of made sense that, well, if I'm studying science, I should probably be a scientist, right? Just makes a lot of sense. So I spent a few years working at the NIH, the National Institutes of Health, up in Maryland as a researcher. And then I was looking for graduate schools. And I think like a lot of young 20-somethings, I was just looking for a big change. You know, I wanted to move somewhere interesting, you know, have new experiences, go on new adventures. So I was really trying to go to graduate school somewhere different. So when an opportunity came up to start my PhD at Stanford, I decided to say yes, and I took that opportunity. So I moved to the West Coast. So I moved to beautiful California here in Palo Alto, which is just an hour south of San Francisco. And I started my PhD at Stanford. But again, kind of how I imagine a lot of 20-somethings feel when they're in graduate school. I got to Stanford and I think I realized, you know, I do enjoy the subject that I'm studying. I was in the stem cell biology program, but I don't know if I loved it enough to make this my life's work. And I thought, oh my goodness, you know, I've spent so much time studying in undergrad. I spent so much time in internships. I spent so much time in applying and spending for graduate school. You know, I can't just stop. That's crazy. You know, I can't just say no. So I decided to continue on, but I got to a point where I was going through a really difficult emotional time. Mm-hmm. A lot of it was because I just wasn't happy here. And I got to a point where I didn't think life was worth living anymore. And through a series of events, a lot of therapy, seeing people, you know, seeking out some help, I eventually decided to leave my program and finish my master's instead of my PhD. And that's kind of what led me to my work with the crisis hotline. I just, you know, I'm not a therapist by training. I'm not a clinician. I'm a scientist by training. I'm just a regular person who wanted to help out.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, we're gonna come back to that conversation. And you mentioned, because I was looking at some of the information that you have online. Your fascination for science, started when you were a little kid, and you used to collect. You spent a great deal of time collecting bugs outside of your home, or in the forest or in the bushes. Tell us about that. Growing up collecting bugs, how did you become fascinated with bugs?
Yeah, I think I've always had just a pretty big interest in the outside world, and I always remember, like, when I was a kid, playing in the yard. My mom would have to call me into the house after the sun went down because I was just obsessed with turning over rocks, seeing what was alive underneath, and it just kind of fascinated me that there was a world out there that is very difficult for us to see with our own eyes. Like, you can walk down to the grocery store, get your milk, get your oranges, come back home, and never realize that there's millions of insects, millions of animals, millions of all these things all around us. And I think that's really what led me to biology generally. It was I was just so fascinated with how the world works and how we all live with one another. And yeah, I think all that time playing in the dirt, digging up stuff, was a pretty formative period of my life.
Awesome. Yeah, man. So you started at George Mason. You did your undergrad. Originally, you were from Virginia Beach, right?
That's right. Yes, I'm from Virginia Beach, but I was a Navy brat. My dad was in the U.S. Navy. My parents immigrated from the Philippines. My dad actually joined the U.S. Navy in the Philippines. My mom was a flight attendant, so they immigrated here. And so I was born in California, actually, and I moved around a lot. I lived in Japan for 6 years, actually, but I ended up in Virginia for high school, and then obviously for undergrad as well.
Awesome. Wow. Yeah, I didn't know all of that, but that's good. That's very interesting how your parents met, a Navy and a flight attendant. So how did they meet?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, so my parents are from the Philippines, and my mom's family and my dad's family are actually from the same island.
Okay.
So their families knew each other, and one thing led to another. And my dad's ship was en route to Seattle in Washington, and my mom's she flew for an airline called Cathay Pacific, which is based out of Hong Kong. And she was going to be in the same area, so they just figured, hey, why don't we chat and say hello? And one thing led to another, and here I am.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it's cool. So my parents are very well traveled. My parents are extremely well traveled people.
I could tell. Amazing. So technically, California is home for you. Is you went back home?
Technically, yes. I have my birth certificate says California on it, so I'm a California boy.
Okay, that makes sense. Because I was like, okay, so you grew up in Virginia. Well, you grew up all over the place, but you went to high school in Virginia and then your undergrad in Virginia. So the weather here compared to the West Coast is quite different. And so, how's the traffic compared to the California traffic compared to another Virginia? Which one do you like the most or don't like?
So it's funny you ask that because people, I think everywhere, maybe in the world, but definitely in the United States, likes to say like, "Oh, our traffic is the worst. Our driver is the worst," or whatever. After being in the DMV, the DC, Maryland, Virginia area, and now being in California, California has a lot of traffic in terms of volume, but drivers in Maryland and DC and Northern Virginia are still the most insane people I have ever encountered in my entire life. I think that the drivers over there are much worse, and I'm glad I learned how to drive over there because I feel like I can do anything.
There you go.
Yeah, I can do anything. It's very if any listeners who have never been to the West Coast compared to the East Coast, it's like a different planet. It just feels totally different. Different people, different lifestyle, different priorities. It's very different out here.
Wow, that's crazy. So yeah. Let's go back to your experience there at the university, Stanford University. So you left George Mason, and then you have these big dreams of going over there and become a scientist and do all this amazing research. The weather was also nice. The campus is beautiful, but all of these things were not making you happy.
Yeah, that was the difficult thing. Because because objectively, all of those measures of life were so good. Because I had this internal feeling that I was unhappy, and I thought to myself, I must be crazy. I immediately discredited my own emotions because I thought, well, how can I be upset? I'm in a good grad program. I'm in California. My parents like to point out all the time, there are people back home who have nothing to eat. who don't have a roof over their head. You've got it
Right.
good. You're living the big life. Why? And so all of this information coming in, I thought, well, I can't be sad. That's just crazy. And I think the reason why I was upset was because fundamentally, I felt like I was coming to work every day with very little energy because I realized early on in my graduate school career that I don't know if I want to do this for the rest of my life. And I still had 6 years, like 4 or 5 years of my PhD left, and the rest of my 20s and my early 30s, and I thought, oh man, I think I made a mistake. And I think for people who feel like they've made a mistake in terms of the direction in their life, that just weighs on you all the time. Every time you wake up in the morning and you're brushing your teeth, or you're having your breakfast, or you're on the phone with a friend, it just weighs on you all the time. And I think that's what was leading to a lot of the dissatisfaction with life. And because I was discrediting myself, I wasn't paying attention to it. I just kept telling myself, it's nothing. Your life is good. What are you talking about? So I never sought help. I never wanted to talk to anybody about it. I thought I was being a big baby. Life is good. So I ignored it until it got to a really difficult spot.
When this happened to you, when you decided to not discredit your emotions, not discredit your experience, and not discrediting what you were going through, not only did you take action to seek help, you also decided to share your experience with other people. And so you have published both scientific journal and also your experience. You have published sciencemagazine.org. You have publications by semanticsscholar.org. You have publication with Google Scholar, Scope blog at Stanford. You have publication with neurotree.org. You have publication with the NIH. And then you have publication with the Stanford Daily, you sharing your experience. And I was reading some of your write-up, and you said that, like you mentioned, you had all these blessings around you, and then you have families that are from the Philippines. Obviously, they're gonna remind you and be like, "Hey, Francis, you have all these blessings, and you have kids back home who are struggling and don't have something to eat, but you never have to worry about that." So having that in the back of your mind, it's not that your parents are telling you, "Hey, this," but you know that just from normal conversation that you would have with your parents, that these things always come up, that people are suffering back home where they came from. And so when you compare that to what you have here, you have a lot to be thankful for. But that is not the thing that is what your internal self needed. And so you actually wrote in a journal that under the simmering pressure of graduate school, and graduate students are expected to work hard, which a lot of graduate students already doing. But there are also external pressures that goes into graduate school, not just the work itself, but there are also other determinants. Like some graduate school students have to have 2-3 jobs, and so they are coming from work to go to school, and they're expected to also pass their programs. And then you have, I know at George Mason, when we were undergrad at George Mason University, we have what they call a food pantry. And that food pantry was for students that don't necessarily have a home. You have students that were sleeping in their cars, and in the morning they prepared to come to school. But teachers don't know that. And so these are some of the serious things that are happening with students in the United States of America. And so those things must be extremely stressful.
Yes, they're extremely stressful. And even at a big university like Stanford, I mean, there was an article in the Stanford Daily last year about graduate students who were literally picking fruit off of the trees. International students, mainly because of certain rules on how much money people can make. They just were not making enough money to make ends meet. So you can be at a fancy school, you can have the fancy name, and still be going through all of these struggles. And it's very stressful. It is extremely stressful for many people. And everyone's experience is very different, I would say.
Right. And then you said that maybe you keep pushing things off. You'd be like, in the graduate school, I kept giving myself milestones when I thought that I would stumble upon happiness. Maybe after I passed this class, I'd be happy. Maybe after I found the right lab, I'd be happy. Maybe after so each time you keep finding things to tell yourself that after you finish this, you'd be happy.
Yes,
but finally, you realize that none of those things were making you happy. When did you realize that?
Maybe when I was in the mental hospital. I don't know. I don't think I had a moment of clarity necessarily when I decided, you know what, this is not working out. This is not, obviously, kicking the can down the road and assuming that I'm going to be happy on the same path. That realization and clarity never came to me. And it was only through I felt like I hit rock bottom where I really realized, oh my goodness, this is not good. This clearly is not leading to somewhere positive. I spent a week at Stanford Medical Center in the mental ward because I was not in an okay state of mind, and I wanted to not continue on with my life, and it was really only hitting that rock bottom where I realized that life was not going the way I wanted it to. And in retrospect, there are definitely ways and signs that we as people can avoid having to hit rock bottom before we realize that. But that was just my journey. That's just what happened to me.
Wow.
It's very difficult to have that clarity. I mean, all of this stuff is very easy to look at in retrospect, right? Like, oh, obviously I was going through a difficult time. Obviously, I should have seen someone for help. But for people going through a mental health struggle, it's very difficult to have that level of awareness in the moment to realize all this stuff is happening, because it's just very difficult to determine for yourself.
Yeah, so these are some serious things that we're talking about. And so I just want to repeat the number again. So if anybody that's listening to this and going through a hard time, the number is 1-800-273-8255. That is the number that you can call. It's the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. That is the number you can call if you need help. And so you decided that, things weren't going to go the way you thought that they were going, and you pretty much gave up hope in this world, and you decided this world is not the place for you to live. Man, first of all, I want to thank you for being so brave to explain this to us, and I appreciate you taking the time to tell us this. So you went through all of that, and then you finally got the help that you need. When you came back to the professors, what did you tell them, and how did they react to it?
I think in academia and in graduate school generally, there's a lot of stigma around mental health. It's not a topic that people talk about very often. I think it's something that universities are very happy to send an email about, like, we're with you, we stand with you, blah, 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 blah. But in terms of actual institutional change, there is not a culture, at least in the places that I've worked at, there is not really a culture where one, just expresses to their boss or to their department, you know what, I'm going through a really hard time right now. And I might need a break, or I might need a day off, or something like that. I was very fortunate to have an advisor whom I trusted. It was not my direct advisor; it was like my program director. And I told him, "Hey, listen, I'm going through some stuff, and I don't even really know if I want to stay here right now. I don't know if I'm in a mental state to make that decision." Which we can come back to later, but that's something we also gave as advice, is that it's very difficult to make a decision that, a really, really important decision, like, should I stay in my graduate program or should I leave, when you're going through a mental health crisis. It's hard to think clearly. So I didn't even know if I was in that headspace. And I was very fortunate that he said, you know what, I understand. Let's take it one step at a time. Let's take the quarter off. We have the quarter system in Stanford. Let's take the quarter off and let's reevaluate at the end of the quarter. But I will say, so that's my story. I do know people who have not spoken up because of fear of what their bosses will say. I know people who have spoken up and their bosses will say, well, it's grad school. It's tough. What are you going to do? I mean, take the day off, I guess, but you got to keep soldiering on. And that may or may not be helpful for people who need the help. So I was very fortunate that I had a lot of the right people in place, but I can tell you, as someone who talks to people all the time who want to end their lives, that's not always the case. Unfortunately, that's not always the case.
It's unfortunate, yep. Because I think the thing that you mentioned, that when you go talk to your program director or your supervisor or your boss, I think the response that is common is that, this is graduate school. What do you expect? It's correct. That's the one that I've heard so many times. And it is unfortunate and sad. And so, but when you talk to your director, they want to make your mental health a priority. And then they told you that, hey, man, whenever you're ready, you can come back. We can have a conversation to see what we wanted to do. And so how was it making that transition from your PhD program of you becoming a scientist to now only settling for your master's degree? I know that the master's degree gives you more happiness and is geared towards closer to something that you think you wanted to do. How was that decision like, making that transition from a PhD to a master's degree?
It was difficult. I felt like, I mean, I obviously was on track. I was doing well in terms of being on track to finish my PhD. Yeah, it was very difficult because I felt like if I chose to leave the program, am I closing a door that I can no longer walk through again? And I hate closing doors. I'm one to try and keep as many options open as possible. But sometimes that's an extremely emotionally draining way to go about things. You know, trying to say yes to all opportunities, keep everything in the air, keep everything open. I was just getting tired of that, and so it was a pretty difficult decision to leave science in a way, at least the science that I knew, doing experiments at the bench. But at the end of the day, you know, fundamentally, I just wasn't happy anymore. And that was the biggest driving decision. And also, you know, as, again, the son of immigrants who came to this country, I realized that I was at a very good school. I had the opportunity to do great things. And all of those external pressures, you know, like I felt, am I disappointing people? Am I, by leaving my PhD at Stanford, am I doing a disservice to all the hard work that my parents, you know, put in to get me to where I am today? A lot of those feelings prevented me initially from walking away. But because I didn't walk away, I mean, I ended up in the hospital. You know, I was on medication. I couldn't even function as a human being. And surely that's not the way to live either, right? So I will say it's a decision that I still think about all of the time. But after leaving my graduate program in the way that I knew it, I am much happier today than I was back then.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I'm definitely happy to hear that you are able to find happiness in the new decision that you've made. And then like I mentioned earlier, that when you were going through this, after you sought the help that you needed, and when things started becoming back normal to you, you actually decided to do a write-up, and you wrote an article called "At the End of the Road: A New Start." What did you mean by that title?
Yeah. So that's an article I wrote for Science, which is a science publication. I felt like when I was going through my mental health crisis that I had driven my car directly into a brick wall. You know, the engine's smoking, the car has stopped, and there's really, really nowhere else to go. And when you get to a point in your life where you feel like there is nothing ahead of you, oftentimes the reaction is, I got to get out. And that could mean I don't want to be here anymore. I don't want to live anymore. That was the end of the road for me. It was not that necessarily that I felt like I didn't have any more opportunity. It's literally that I did not see life continuing beyond this point. And it was only through therapy, some medication, conversations with friends, years of work, that I started to look at my surroundings and think, you know, maybe I can't go forward, but can I turn right? Can I turn left? You know, can I make a U-turn? Can I do something different? That is what I mean by a new start. Is, you know, I recognized that life had ended in certain ways. Like, you know, the life that I was leading before is in many ways had ended, and I didn't want to continue that anymore. But that didn't mean that I had to discontinue life altogether. You know, that's a part of my life that is ending. But how can we find new ways of thinking and new ways to grow? And that took a lot of reflection. That's not something that I thought of in the moment, but that is what that title means.
Wow. And then you had another write-up in 2019. You wrote another article that talks about a deadly academic machine in 2019, where you talked about the things that needed to change in the institutions, starting at Stanford University and across the country. What were you thinking when you were writing that deadly academic machine article?
Sure. So when I wrote that article, I was taking a break from Stanford. But in the months preceding that article, we had a few graduate students commit suicide here at Stanford. And Stanford is certainly not alone in its mental health crisis. Universities around the United States suffer from extremely difficult problems in mental health. Graduate students, in particular, undergraduates who, you know, or minorities or experiencing homelessness, all these things lead to a really tough time. And so I was thinking to myself, what is it about academia, universities, that leads people down this road, and how do we fix it? And I realized that, when a student, let's say when a student passes away tragically because they decided life was not worth living, what normally happens? I can tell you from the perspective of Stanford, we get an email from like Student Life. We get an email from our president saying, this is a tragedy. We are here for you. Here are the numbers you can call if you need assistance. And that's it. Maybe maybe they form a committee. Universities like to do this. Let's form a committee, an exploratory committee to figure out what's going on. And at the end of the day, Stanford can say all it wants, right? Stanford can make all the declarative statements, all the feel-good statements it wants. But at the end of the day, most graduate students, we work with a professor. Like we have a boss. Like my boss is, I guess in an abstract sense, is Stanford. But my day-to-day interactions are with my advisor, my boss. And until my boss, my advisor, my department are making similar statements saying we support students undergoing mental health struggles, we support people who need to take a break for their own mental health, nothing's going to change. Because again, Stanford and other universities can start as many committees as they want. And I think this is not just applicable to mental health issues. I think this is applicable to, racial equality issues, et cetera, but perhaps that's another podcast. Until the relationship between the graduate student and the advisor is fixed, until the relationship between the graduate student and the department and the departmental culture is fixed, nothing is going to change. And that's why I wrote the article, because I feel like we were losing that part of the conversation that, we can say all these things as a university, but the day-to-day operations, I don't talk to the president of my university every day. I talk to my boss, my professor in my department. And that's what needs to change.
Right. And then you actually mentioned some concrete changes that needed to happen. And you mentioned in the article that when you went to the CAPS, which is the Counseling and Psychological Services, there are so many long lines. And then when you always ask them, why is it that these lines are so long? Why is it that students don't get the help they need? They always talk about resources. And then you went ahead and highlighted some of the changes that needed to happen. Do you want to discuss that?
Yeah, of course. So yeah, that's a frustration, definitely at Stanford, and I realize it's a frustration at many places in the United States in universities, is that there are not enough clinicians, there are not enough clinician hours in psychological services. There are not enough clinicians with particular interests of particular specialty areas. For example, the mental health services that each person, let's say you take 10 students who are depressed, the particular clinicians that they need to talk to are probably not going to be the same. Maybe they want to talk to a clinician who has experience navigating LGBTQ issues. Maybe they need to talk to a clinician who has experience navigating issues as as being an immigrant, for example.
Right.
So not all clinicians are the same. So not having all of those resources is difficult. And I think what was frustrating for me is that I think it's a pretty well-known fact that Stanford has a lot of money. Stanford has, I think, the third largest endowment in the United States at tens of billions of dollars. We have a very beautiful campus. It's very nice if anyone has a chance to visit. It's a very beautiful campus. But all I can think is we have these fancy buildings, this fancy grass, these fancy statues, these fancy fountains and whatever, but we can't hire one more therapist. We can't hire one more clinician. And that was frustrating to me. So in terms of the concrete changes, I think it comes down to dollars and cents, right? If a university cannot divert $100,000 from its billions of dollar endowment to hiring 2 staff at the counseling psychological services, I think that says a lot about the university's priorities.
Right.
So at the end of the day, it's money and it's people. Those are the changes that need to happen. We need more clinicians. We need more clinicians of varying specialties. Again, clinicians that have experience in certain types of trauma, clinicians who are have experience with certain communities of color. All these issues are very nuanced, and we need to get more people in these offices that have that kind of experience.
Yep. And so that is definitely, because Stanford is like the Harvard of the West Coast. So
Right.
they definitely have enough money to hire a diverse group of clinicians. Like you mentioned, sometimes you only needed to talk to somebody that understands you being an immigrant in the United States, or sometimes you needed to talk to somebody that understands you because you fall into the LGBTQI community. So that is called a diverse workplace, because these universities always market themselves. They always put on their flyers, on their websites, on their marketing, on the news, anywhere that they are diverse and that they have the best of the best, but they forget about the essential basic necessity, taking care of your students, the same populations that bring the money to your campus.
Yeah, and I will, if I can add to that, I often thought, Stanford has billions and billions of dollars in the bank. If Stanford can't get this right, how can I expect Mason, for example, to get it right, who has not even a tenth of the same endowment or same funds? What the heck is going on? And so, in addition to a resource problem, I think it's just a culture problem.
Right.
At the end of the day, Stanford, Harvard, all these big institutions, they don't become top-tier research institutions because all their students are happy. They get to that point because they're putting out good publications and they're putting out smart people. Whether or not their students are happy is not a metric of success for a lot of these universities. So I don't think it's given the priority that it needs to. It's one of those things that I guess for many administrators is nice to have, obviously. But at the end of the day, I mean, you look at university rankings, for example, all these websites, the US World Today, whatever, like where is the metric that, on student happiness necessarily? It's not as important, if it exists at all, as how many papers did this university publish? How much research funding did they bring in? It's just not a metric of success that a lot of people, unfortunately, care about. And so I think that is what leads to a lack of desire to fund resources into a lot of these services.
Yeah. and so mental health is serious. It's a serious matter that's happening at universities and across the country.
Right.
And so when you talk to graduate students, since you started speaking about this, when you talk to graduate students, what are some of the stigmas that are associated with mental health? What do they tell you?
When I published that article in Science, I got dozens of emails from both students at Stanford and also other places who are going through really, really difficult emotional problems. And I think the biggest stigma is that when you are in graduate school, obviously you got into graduate school, so you're an intelligent person, right? There is the feeling that one needs to project this aura of I am competent all of the time. I am extremely intelligent. I can do the hard work. I can, Stanford made a good investment in me by bringing me to this campus because I can do the work. Putting up that facade oftentimes means that when things are hard and you are going through a difficult emotional time, you don't feel comfortable talking about it because you don't want to break that sort of persona, right? That you are this invincible graduate student. So I think that's the biggest stigma, is that they don't want to tell their advisors that they're going through a tough time, because then they're afraid that maybe their advisor thinks, okay, maybe you're not the right person to work here in my lab. I should have hired this other person. A lot of people wanted to work with me. Maybe I made a mistake, taking you on into my laboratory. So I think that's probably the biggest stigma, is that people are afraid to speak up because they don't want the perception of themselves as a scholar, as an academic, to change either in the community or with their own advisors.
And the WHO, the World Health Organization, defines health. Health is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. So knowing that, and then we also are talking about mental health. The determinants for mental health has a wide range. Students suffer from social isolation, poor housing, unemployment, poverty, not having enough to eat. And on top of that, a lot of students also are responsible for taking the financial burden of their program, because not all program offers full scholarships. And so some of these students are working professionals. They are full-time workers and also managing to go to school and having to do well and perform well into their programs. Right. Knowing all of that, and you started speaking out about this, you started writing articles about this, and people are reaching out to you. And in addition to your full-time job, you decided to volunteer with the National Suicide Hotline. How did you make that decision, and why is it important that you volunteer with that suicide hotline?
That's a great question. When I was going through my own mental health struggle, I ended up calling a hotline very similar to the national hotline. And having a voice to speak with on the other line really saved my life. So when I was trying to think of ways to give back to the community, I thought that volunteering for a similar hotline would be a really good option. But I thought like, oh, well, I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a therapist. I don't know if I would be helpful in these contexts. But I learned that actually volunteers for the national hotline, as well as local counties, get training oftentimes through their own programs, on-the-job training, and you don't need to be a licensed mental health professional. You do need to go through a lot of training to work on the hotline, but you don't need to be a licensed mental health professional. So if you are just the average person who wants to help out, this is it's a good opportunity for you. And I think, although I love my job, I was kind of missing the kind of visceral satisfaction that you get when you directly help another person through a difficult time. For example, I like talking to my friends when they're going through a tough time, not because they're going through a tough time, but when friends call me and they're like, she broke up with me, or whatever. I do enjoy sitting there with that person, with my friend, and helping them get through a difficult time, and knowing that I helped my friend really makes me feel good. I thought that helping out with a national hotline would allow me to talk to a lot of people going through a difficult time and amplify that feeling of good over many times.
Well, thank you for all that you're doing, because that is a very, very important volunteer work that you're doing there, saving the lives of people. And so what is the best part of that? You already mentioned it when you give the example with your friends, and sometimes somebody just needs somebody to hear them out. Without you don't necessarily have to say anything. You just need to hear me out.
Exactly.
And then once you hear me out, it makes me feel better, because I have been able to express exactly what's going on internally, and having that person out there to hear you out. What is the best part of your job or volunteering?
I can't begin to describe the feeling you get when you have like a 30, 45-minute conversation with someone who wanted to end their lives, but at the end of the call says, you know what, Francis, you really helped me out. I was going through a tough time. You really helped me out. I think I want to at least try one more day. Just the idea that I have helped someone move on one more day. We're not fixing people here for lifetimes. We're just getting through one more hour, one more day, one more week. All of those incremental victories are what I strive for. And when I feel like I've achieved that with a caller, it's the most incredible feeling, because I remember what it's like to feel like I don't want to keep going. And it is no small feat to get someone to think or realize that, you know what, I do want to move on, or I do want to keep going for just a little bit longer. That's definitely the most rewarding thing for me. And knowing that I am helping contribute to a solution to a problem that is growing in this country, and that I'm doing my part to help solve those issues.
Yeah, man, that's amazing and powerful. But this is also it must be a very stressful feat as well, because you are talking with people that are at the end of losing hope in this world. They said, this world is not for me. It must be a very stressful thing.
Yes.
And then you keep coming back each time. What keeps you going, and what do you do for self-care?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, I've had people call me and have told me at the beginning of the phone call, I'm ending my life. You can't convince me otherwise. And when someone says that to you, you get stressed out. I think understandably, like, okay, well, we need to work through a lot of things very quickly. And it can be extremely draining. And I think one of the most difficult parts of the job that leads to that emotional drain is that because we're not regular therapists, we're not regular clinicians, I could have someone call me on the phone and say, I'm going to end my life, and I'll get through the conversation, and I could have that person end the call, and I have no way of following up with this person. This is a totally anonymous call. I don't know what happens to these people. I don't know what happened. Over the hundreds of people I've spoken to on the hotline, I don't know what their stories have ended up being like. And so that can be stressful too. You get in your car at the end of a shift and think, God, I really hope I helped that person. And knowing that it's impossible for me to follow up and say, hey, Did I help? Are you feeling better now? That not having closure is very difficult. So
Right.
something that we always keep in mind is that we can't fill another person's cup up if our own cups are empty. If we are emotionally drained and we can't, if we're in a pretty negative or difficult headspace, it's difficult for us to help other people. So after every call, I work with several counselors at the same time. We always try to debrief with one another, saying, hey, that call sounded difficult. How was that for you? How did you feel about the end of that call? And also I think doing it on a daily basis helps a lot. I do this like once a week,
Okay.
usually. So I think that helps. And also I've been seeing a therapist for years now. And so I'm able to debrief with my personal therapist, which is very, 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 very helpful as well.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. That's for sure. I like the part where every call you come back and debrief with somebody and just to check in and see how you're feeling and if you needed to take another call. And if you don't think, because once you hear that difficult call, if you don't think you are in the right space and your cup is not full, then you're not in the right mental state to help another person fill their cup. And then so maybe at that point, maybe you needed a break as well. So I like that aspect of it. And so,
Exactly.
and so continuing with the conversation on this, say I called you and say, Francis, there's nothing you can tell me right now to convince me otherwise. I have decided, I have made up my mind. What do you tell me?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think if you were to pose that question to the people who have not gone through the training or have experience, it seems like an impossible question to answer, right? Because first of all, if you're calling the hotline, I don't know you, Tijani,
Right.
in this scenario. Like I don't know where you came from. I don't know your story. I have no information about you. You may not even tell me your age. I don't even know that information. So I think the first thing I would say is to not deny your reality. And what I mean by that is if you were to tell me, Francis, there's nothing you can say to convince me that life is not worth going on, worth continuing, my initial reaction cannot be, hey, you're wrong. Tijani, you are wrong. There is a reason that you can move on today. Oftentimes when we go through life and we hear, a question like the one you posed, we immediately want to invalidate, right?
Right.
We want to say,
Right.
no, you're not, you can make it. No, that feeling is not correct. You can be happy again. Hearing that no, all those invalidations can actually end up pushing these emotions for a person deeper inside because, I can't talk about this. So one thing that we want to do is validate that experience. I will validate with you, Tijani, like, given what you've told me about what you're going through, I totally understand that you don't want to move on with life. I can see why you feel that way, and that's okay. So first of all, we want to validate that the emotions that you are experiencing are real, and it is not for me to tell you that it is wrong to feel this way. Because imagine, at least in my experience growing up, whenever I would tell my mom, Bob got this new video game and I want it. So, I'm sad, because I don't have this video game. My mom would always tell me, Francis, you should not be sad. You have lots of other things. You should be happy for your friend. You should feel this way. You should feel this. You should feel that. You should not feel this way. All of our feelings are valid for us. And
Right.
regardless of other people's interpretation of those feelings, and validating that is the first step. And I'm sorry I'm taking so long to answer your question, but when someone calls me with that question, there's a lot of things that are just going through my brain. So, but in addition to validating that, to validating what you are going through, I don't, at least in my practice, immediately try to offer a solution, because oftentimes people call me with problems that there are no solutions for. Because let's say, Tijani, you call me saying, life is not worth living because I lost my mom, or I have a disease, or I lost my job, or I lost my house. There's nothing that I can say to you right now that will get your mom back, that will get your house back, that will get your job back.
Right.
So we don't, at the crisis hotline, we don't get hung up on this idea that, okay, to make this person not suicidal anymore, I have to fix their issue. That's not the case. We can't fix the problems, and that's not our job. Our job is to listen. So if you were to tell me life is not worth living anymore, I would just get you to start talking. Even, things as small as, tell me about, where are you right now? What did you have for breakfast? Just like keeping the conversation going so that we can get the topic a little bit more friendly, a little bit more flowing. Just having that person on the other line and listening to you, even if it's about something inane, like what you watched on TV the other day, is helpful. And to your point, what's one topic that I really focus on with callers who tell me that there's no reason to keep on living? I often ask people to tell me about a time in their life they felt happy. Get one time, just one time. Maybe it was many years ago. Maybe it was 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. But usually people can point to at least one time when they felt happy. And it's not necessarily like, I won the lottery or I got married or whatever. It could be, I got off the bus yesterday and the bus driver said, "Have a good day." And I felt a little happier in that moment. For a lot of people, thinking about times where, I was happy once. So oftentimes that will lead people to come to the conclusion, well, if I was happy once, maybe I can be happy again.
Right.
maybe not now, maybe not next week, maybe not next year, but the idea of happiness is not an impossible idea. It's possible.
Right.
That's something I talk about.
Wow, that is awesome. And I know that you're going to continue to get the practice that you need to continue to help people and saving the lives of so many people, even though, like you said, sometimes you don't even know if the conversation that you had made the difference. You don't know the outcome of what you just talked about. Did they end up staying alive? Did they end up actually doing what they said they were gonna do? So,
Right.
but you know that each time you had the conversation with that person, you're giving them your best, and you are always there for them, and that is a positive thing to do. And so, if anybody is going through any of these things that we're talking about, the phone number to call is the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, which is 800-273-8255. That is the number that you can call. And there are so many resources online to try to get the help that you need. There are so many resources in the communities. Some communities have resources that you can reach out to, because this is a very, very serious thing that's going on in our institutions, from schools to churches to mosques to universities to workplaces as well. Across the country, this is some serious issue that is going on. And so, Francis, before we end the conversation here about mental health, is there anything else you wanted to talk about when it comes to mental health and how people can seek resources?
Sure. I just wanted to add, for anyone who is going through a difficult time, who's listening to this podcast and is going through a difficult time right now, that we as people often play this game where we try to compare the ways in which we're going through a tough time with one another. So, like, let's say, I feel like life sucks because my show got canceled on Netflix or whatever. And you realize that, your friend just lost their job. And so you might think, oh, because my friend lost their job, that's a way worse experience than my experience. He has it hard, so I have no right to feel sad. That's not the way in which we think, and that's not the way in which mental health works. This is not a competition to see who is the saddest, and if I'm not the saddest, then I have no right to be sad. You have a reason to be sad for whatever reason it works out for you. So I would encourage people, even if you feel like what you're going through is not super hard or super difficult, maybe you feel like, I don't really want to see a therapist, or I don't really want to talk to somebody because I feel like life's just not that bad right now. I would encourage you to reach out to somebody. I would encourage you to reach out to a friend. I would encourage you to talk to a therapist, even if you feel like you don't need it. I would encourage you to start those conversations now, because oftentimes those negative emotions, if they're, kind of bubbling beneath the surface and are not that bad, they can get worse over time. So I would encourage people to reach out, even if you feel like there are people out there who will have it way worse than you. It's not a competition.
Right. And the WHO again define mental health. It says mental health is a state of well-being in which an individual realizes his or her own abilities, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively, and is able to make a contribution to his or her community. And so having that help that Francis is talking about is a very good thing for you and also for the people that you love and your community as a whole. And so we've talked so much in details about mental health. Let's talk about you, Francis. Now you are in a better space, both mentally, physically, emotionally, holistically. You are in a better place.
I think
Talk
so.
to us about, we are happy that you're here. We love you, man. You know that. And so you're in a better place and you're continue to improving yourself, which is amazing. Talk to us about the work that you do in California. Why are you stuck over there?
I have to say, when I told my advisor in grad school that I wanted to leave, he said, "Okay, I support you. What are you going to do?" And I told him, "I don't know. I had no idea. I left. I did not leave my program knowing that I had a job waiting for me on the other side. All I knew is that my situation that I was living in sucked, and I wanted to get out."
Wow. Speaking of hope.
Right. So I did end up finding a job at a biotech company called 10x Genomics out here in the Bay Area. So I found a good position for me, which is why I stayed. And also my girlfriend is finishing her PhD at Stanford. So we're going to be here for a few more years as she's finishing up and as we're finishing our life here. But I do think we want to get back to the East Coast someday.
Okay. And 10x Genomics, what do you do with them? Are you allowed to tell us what you do?
Sure. So yeah, of course. So I work in communications at 10x Genomics. So we're a biotech company that sells products to scientists. So I work on the communications team. So I design and write content that basically helps our customers who are scientists understand how to use our products and how to perform experiments, all the technical stuff, troubleshooting, how to use different reagents, how to plan for experiments. A lot of that writing and communication, that's the work that I do. So I'm able to stay more on the communication side, but I'm able to put on my scientist hat. So I feel like my whole life I've thought that all of the communication, the writing, that was all those were my extracurricular activities. That wasn't something that I could do seriously. That was always my side thing. And when I left grad school, I thought, what if I made my side hustle, my side gig, my full-time gig, and my full-time hustle? And I think doing that has made me a lot happier.
That's so smart. That's how successful business people do it, right? They find what they love, what they enjoy, and what people are willing to pay for it. And that's how they create a business. And so I like your technical thinking, man. That's very smart.
Yeah, I didn't come up with it very quickly, but yeah, I don't know why, but I always thought like all this writing stuff, like it's fun, but this is not my serious work. I'm a scientist and I do want to do all this stuff. So being able to actually focus on things that I'm good at like that, I don't know, it's made me a much happier person, I think.
Awesome. And you have also written up some work with 10x Genomics. I was looking at their website. You had a technical note there, Visium imaging guidelines that you were part of as a writer, and you also did something called spatial gene expression regent kits. I don't know any of these terms, and I don't even know if you can talk about them, but you are doing amazing work over there, man.
I appreciate it, man. Thank you.
Yes, sir. And so now that, we know that Francis is not going to come to the East Coast anytime soon. You're over there and you're trying to build something over there with your girlfriend. And I'm sure that your girlfriend also played a huge part into whatever you were going on at the time as a very supportive person. I don't know if she was in the picture before all of this was happening, but I'm sure she's been there throughout to help you and support you.
She was absolutely there. She was the one who drove me to the hospital. She's been there every step of the way, and I couldn't have asked for a better partner.
After this podcast, tell her that we thank her so much for that major contribution that she made in your life, because clearly it made all the difference.
I will definitely let her know.
Awesome. And so the last part of this podcast is we've asked you to write up a letter. But before we go into the letter, I just want to talk about the things that we've already been discussing here, the mental health situations. So what people can do is, we already talked about it, seeking help. Talk to someone you trust about your feelings. Most people feel better after talking to somebody who cares about them or who they love. Seek professional help. Yep. Your local healthcare worker or doctor is a good place to start. your community, if you're a part of a church, if you're a part of a mosque, if you're a part of a club, you can seek help there. Remember that with the right help, you can get better. Keep up with the activities that you enjoy doing, keep doing those. Stay connected with people you care about. Right now with COVID-19, things are much different. You don't necessarily have to drive to somebody's home, but you can call them. I was speaking to one of my mentor the other day, and she said, we cannot be socially distant. We can have social distancing, but we cannot be socially distanced, socially disconnected. We can still stay connected via the methods that, if anything, this virus has taught us that we could be creative. We have so much, at least in the United States, we have so much technology to utilize to stay connected with people we love and people that care about us.
Yes.
Exercise. If you enjoy exercising, that is something that keeps you busy. It keeps your mind going. It keeps your heart rate running. Stick to the regular eating and sleeping habits. Make sure you sleep well. Accept that you might have stress. Accept that you might have issues that are going on. Oftentimes we have so much burden from family expectations, from our communities, from people around us, from friends, but you have to listen to yourself. Yep. Just like what Francis did, he listened to himself. And when he did that, he's in a better place and he's doing amazing work. If you drink, avoid excessive drinking, just have moderate drinking. Or when you're going to a bar, come with your friends. And so tell them before you get to the bar, tell them, hey, I'm intended to only drink 2 beers. If I start going to 5, please stop me. And so, just understanding that. And then if you feel suicidal, contact somebody for help immediately. And that's what we've been talking about, contacting the phone number of 1-800-273-8255 for any help, any suicidal ideation, any suicidal thoughts. Contact that phone number or contact somebody that cares about you or somebody that you think would hear you out.
And if I may add, Tijani, people can also text home to 741-741. Sometimes people don't want to talk to somebody over the phone, and I get that. So if you want to text a crisis counselor, that resource is 741-741.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it. And then so at the end, just like we've talked about, seek the help, get the help you need, text if you need to. You can also call 911, right?
Yes, that's true. So if you feel like you are in immediate danger to others or yourself, you can always call 911 to figure out what the options are in immediate crisis help. However you get the help, get the help.
Right. Okay, so that's good. So there are different ways to get help. All that matters is you get the help you need so you can live another hour, another day, another week. Yep. And so that's what we want because you matter. We care about you. We love you. And we know that you are a great member of the community and a great member to your family. So that being said, man, the last part of this is you have a letter that you wrote to yourself. Are you ready to read that letter to us?
I have it right in front of me. Yep.
All right, go ahead, man.
Okay. Dear Francis, I don't know how often people get the opportunity to write a letter to their younger selves, but I imagine that many are tempted by pain and regret to tell themselves exactly what they should do. Don't talk to that girl. Do take that class. Invest in Tesla in 2003 at 17 a share. As your future self, I've had the great pleasure of seeing how life has played out for you. And perhaps to your disappointment, I'm not going to tell you to change a thing. Why? Because telling you how to avoid the pitfalls in your life will take away all of the lessons that have caused you to grow and flourish into the person you are today. But don't worry. Even though I won't discuss specifics, I'm going to give you some advice that will hopefully soften life's blows. You're going to spend a lot of time chasing opportunities, not because you want to, but because you think those opportunities will please other people in your life. All I ask is that you listen to that little voice inside you that wonders, is this really what I want to do? You're going to spend a lot of time afraid to try new things because you're worried about what others think of you. Standing in the future, I can tell you 2 things that are unquestionably true. 1, no one really cares that much. And 2, the best things that will ever happen to you happen because you took a leap of faith. You're going to spend a lot of time neglecting people in your life because you became wrapped up in another person. Take a piece of paper every week and write down the top 10 people in your life and call them, will you? And lastly, you are going to spend a lot of time traveling to far-off places you never thought you'd reach and meeting people who would walk to the ends of the earth with you. You'll laugh until the sun goes down, and you'll cry until the sun comes up. Your life's potential is only limited by how much you can dream, and you dream big. Love, Francis.
Wow. I hear life played out. Tesla. We wish we would invested in Tesla. Pitfalls. Yeah. Lessons. Please dream big. Afraid. I heard leap of faith. I heard write down 10 people that you speak, 10 people that care about you, and please call them. I heard dream big. I heard dream big and love, Francis. Those are amazing words, man. That letter is amazing. Thank you for writing that letter, man.
My pleasure, Tijani. Thanks for inviting me on the podcast. I appreciate it.
Of course. You have any more last minute things that you want to say to the listeners?
Just be well and get the help that you need. And one thing that I will add is that on the crisis hotline, we don't have superpowers. We're just someone who can listen, and you can be that person to friends in your life, to people in your life. You can be that friend who just listens, and that's all what we ask to do is just be a good listener and be there for people.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
My pleasure, Tijani.
If you have any questions for Francis or you just want to follow up on his work, you can go on his website at aguiastanda.com, aguiasanda.com. That is his website. Or you can follow him on Twitter and Instagram. The same handle as ATP and me, ATP and AND me, M-E. It's one word. You can follow him on Twitter and Instagram, or you can go on his website. That's how you can follow up with him. And if you have any questions about anything we've talked about, he'll be more than happy to reach out to you and provide you more details and provide you more information. Thank you for listening to this episode. There you have it, everybody. If you're listening to this still, I appreciate you so much. Thank you for listening through and through. Make sure if you haven't done so already, please hit that subscribe button so you can get this automatically downloaded the next time new episodes come out. We have a lot more experiences and stories to tell, and I cannot wait to share them with you. So make sure you hit that subscribe button. Reviews are always appreciated. Thank you. I appreciate you, and let me know what you think on our Instagram at Verdad Duele Pod. Our team is here to serve you. We look forward to hearing about your successes, and maybe one day we may invite you to the studio to share. We wish you luck. The La Verdad Duele family has your back. Thank you so much.